Today on The Question Is with Anthony Portantino, we're going to discuss 6 letters that will have a historic impact on public education throughout the state of California. These 6 letters have some parents and reformers excited, while others are scratching their heads and wondering what LCFF and CC mean. What are they expected to do, and why are we even having this discussion? What's the fuss with local control funding formula and Common Core? Coming up on The Question Is, we'll hear from 2 leading educators who will share their thoughts on the latest alphabetic reforms coming to a public school near you. I'm excited to have with me today 2 leading educators of large public school districts. Dr. Jan Britz, the Superintendent of the Burbank Unified School District, and John Gundry, the Superintendent of the Pasadena Unified School District. Both large districts face unique challenges and opportunities with Governor Brown's local control funding formula and with the brainchild of America's governors, Common Core education. It's too soon for a report card, but not too soon to take a pop quiz on our way to a final examination of these reforms. So let's ask the question. Thank you guys for being here.
Well, thank you.
Absolutely.
It's my pleasure.
Mr. Gundry, could you tell us, sort of give us the Cliff Note version of local control funding formula? What was the governor's brainchild?
Well, I actually had an opportunity to hear the governor talk about it before he publicly proposed it. And so I know what he was thinking from the very beginning when he came into office was that the state of California is not putting enough money into public education. And so he was looking from the beginning for a way that he could take more money during an economic downturn and begin to dedicate those funds to improving our public education system. The other thing that's different about the local control funding formula as opposed to the traditional funding formula we had is that it differentiates the funding over a period of time. And what I mean by that is that if a district serves a high concentration of students of poverty, foster youth, or English learners, those districts get more money under this formula than districts that serve lower concentrations of those students. So the idea is that this formula will be eased in over a 7-year period. They're not going directly from one funding formula to another, because there can be quite a big difference. In a district like LAUSD, for example, that serves a very high concentration of students in those categories, they're going to see over the 7 years a huge increase in funding from the state. And so rather than...
was the theory that those students theoretically cost more to educate because they have a unique set of challenges?
Yeah, that's what they call it. They call these funds concentration funds because the belief is that if you have a high concentration of students in those categories, that it costs exponentially more money to serve them, because the research shows that students in those categories who are in high concentrations achieve at lower levels than if they are in low concentrations. For example, if you have just a few English learners in a regular ed population, you can see that they learn English faster than if you have a high concentration of students who don't learn English who are all together in one place.
Right. Now in Burbank, you're not getting those concentration grants, but the governor did try to go back to 2007 levels at some point. Could you?
He did, but he's implementing that gradually in the next 7 to 8 years. Well, we do not have concentration grants, and one of the interesting things as Pasadena is, you know, you have to have over 50% or more of these students in order to get the concentration grants. In Burbank, we have 42%.
Right.
So we have a big chunk of that population in our student population overall, and even though we have a big grouping of them, we do not get any funds, and we still have to educate them and meet their needs in the same way. So for a district like Burbank, it's challenging as well, and we feel like we're kind of losing out on that. And we've been like all the other districts in the state. We've been taking those cuts for the last 5 or more years. And now we embrace the fact that with the new local control funding formula that Governor has implemented, that we're not taking any cuts this year. But at the same time, too, we do not have enough funds to really kind of restore the types of programs that we need right now, and that has been such a loss in our district for the kids.
So over the last 5 years, what do you think the rough estimate of what was cut from your respective districts over the last 5 years before local control funding?
Well, go ahead, you want to go?
No, I'm thinking about that.
Okay, well, for Burbank, I always tell the parents this because I want them to be able to relate to where we are. Our total district budget was about $215 million. In the last 5 years, we've been cut over $100 million. So we're at 115, and then we get a little bit more restoration with the new LCFF. And I say to parents, you know, if you had a budget of $215,000 and you had to cut $100,000, what kinds of things would you cut? We've cut staffing both at the sites and at the district level. We've increased class size. We have no class sizes that are really under 30 at all, even in the K-3. We've implemented class size. We're going to be implementing that according to the local control to 24:1. We've cut programs, anything that really is directly working with students. Those kinds of things have had to be cut. In addition to that, as we work with no fees in public education, our booster clubs and our parent fundraising has really kind of skyrocketed.
Right.
And we're lucky in Burbank. We have a great amount of parent support, and they have been very supportive, but that's the only way that we've been able to hang on to a lot of our programs for our students.
Right. I'm very familiar with Burbank Arts for All and the great work that they do in helping. Obviously, Pasadena's over the last 5 years faced almost exactly the same challenges. What do you say the impact has been on your budget?
We have a similar story in Pasadena, although we did invest a lot of money into maintaining relatively low class size, at least in K through 3. So we don't have the kinds of class sizes that Jan is talking about, but at least not across the board. You know, we still have some small class sizes, but in order to do that, we've been deficit spending. And so part of the decision that we've made is to deficit spend in order to maintain some basic services and to maintain what we call our signature programs. And because there's certain things that if you lose them, they're very hard to get back. We have, for example, an international baccalaureate program. And the professional development of that program can be expensive, but if you lose it, it's very hard to ever get it back. And so we were still trying to grow a couple of programs during the recession when we're cutting back. And so we had to make huge cutbacks. And I'll point out that at the same time, there's an expectation from the state and the federal government that students will continue to achieve at higher levels every year, even when resources are being cut to the bone.
Right. One of the things that I think most people would not have argued with the basic framework or idea of local control funding formula. There's a certain cohort of students that generically or just cost more, and districts that have those students should have the resources to meet the needs of those students. I think the challenge was, how do you do it in a way that doesn't take from other school districts? How do could the base year have been raised a little higher? Should it have been, should the line have started higher than where it started? And obviously we're seeing some good fiscal news coming out of Sacramento, and I think the hope is that maybe that will bear more fruit to all districts across the state. And I'm wondering if the administrators and others are lobbying heavily for that additional funding as we go forward.
Definitely.
Yes, and actually, I had an expectation that in the May revision that we were going to see more money being put into, at least into Common Core implementation, and that didn't happen. And I was really disappointed because I was sure, because we are not ready for Common Core, and they gave us a significant amount of money last year for Common Core implementation, but it isn't enough, and so we were expecting more, especially with all the good financial news coming out of Sacramento.
And you're a district getting extra money
We are.
And still not getting enough to meet the
Right.
needs as you see fit.
That's right. Our unduplicated count of students is about 70%, which is considerably higher. So we're over 50%, so we do qualify for concentration funds.
Right.
But it still isn't enough, especially since everybody in the community knows we're getting the concentration funds, and so they have very high expectations
Of how it's going to be spent.
about how that money is going to be spent, and a lot of people don't understand that we're not going back to 2007 all at once.
Right.
There isn't
Right.
nearly as much money as people think there is, and we can't just start funding all of the things that we've been cutting over the last 5 to 7 years. But there's an expectation that we will, particularly since we were deficit spending. And
Right.
so we're getting some infusion of money, but yet we're having to cover the deficit. And we, as many districts, gave a pay raise to our employees who had not had a raise since 2007.
Right. And I
Same
think
with us.
Same with you.
Yes, and the same thing too. We were deficit spending too, so we just need a little bit more money to make us whole, and then move on and try to do these restorations.
And what I really want to lobby for is not only did we not get any more money in the May revision, we had a liability added in our contributions for STRS were increased pretty significantly. And so in our case, that adds about $1 million liability. And so instead of taking another step forward, we took $1 million step backward.
And I think it was surprising. I mean, I think most people thought that there was going to be some additional funds, especially since the financial picture was rosy. Prop 30 passed. We all rallied to support Prop 30 because, education was the poker chip placed on the table to make us all support it, and it passed overwhelmingly. So I think there was that optimism. What is AXA and the Sacramento institutions telling you? Do they think it's still a negotiating game, or do they think this is the final picture for this year? Are you guys
For
getting
Common Core money, you mean?
Common Core or any additional funding?
Well, I think that right now what I'm hearing, and John may hear a little bit more, I know he has some contacts there, but I'm just hearing that we're really where we are as far as funding. We may get a little bit more Common Core because there is additional money in Sacramento. But the thing that is interesting is the public, with going out in the public and talking to people in our community, they really feel that a lot of money has just kind of flowed down from Sacramento into education, and that's not the reality of what we're dealing with.
Right, and that's why we're having this show, is because people think since Prop 30 passed, happy days are here again.
Yes.
And they don't understand that the baseline wasn't just brought up just to start.
And well, Prop 30 didn't bring any new money to public education.
Right. Just helped us.
Comment.
Helped us stave off cuts.
Yes.
Yes.
It
Right.
staved off further cuts.
Right, and I think that's the challenge, because people voted for it. They felt good about their vote. The financial picture is rosy, but as you two have outlined, there's still a lot of financial concerns in thriving
Very
suburban, mid-sized districts, as well as small and bigger districts throughout the state of California. So in our next segment, we're going to talk about Common Core, and then we'll talk about some rosier things and some of the fun stuff. I know the Jackson Elementary immersion program is thriving, and there's some other things that we're going to talk about. So thanks for being. Come back on The Question Is. We'll go into Common Core, which is also a very big issue facing our public schools in California. Thanks for being here.
Who needs this modern world? I can live just fine out here without the road rage and boy bands. Of course, I might miss my Charter HD with football on ESPN, and Walking Dead on AMC, ESPN and AMC. And, well, Shark Week on Discovery HD, but that's all. AMC, ESPN, Discovery, TBS, and Comedy Central HD, but that's it. Except for HBO HD.
Charter now has over 100 HD channels and more brilliant HD shows on demand than ever.
We're back on The Question Is with Anthony Portantino with two of California's leading educators. We're going to talk about Common Core in this segment. Dr. Britz, please tell us about Common Core, this brainchild of the governors around the country.
Well, previously, every state since No Child Left Behind has had their own state standards. And those are content standards as far as what we're teaching in each subject area with the academics. Now, this is an international reform as far as Common Core standards, because we really are having the same standards or close to that with all the states across the nation. We have 45 states that have embraced that, and we're working with that. We're also working with 2 assessment systems so that we can really see where the proficiency of our students are and not just compare them in the state of California, but compare them internationally. So it's really good to see what kind of education we have in our state now when we compare them outside of the state of California.
And I think that's an important point, because the governors looked at the international standards when they created a nonprofit to come up with Common Core. So and I
Correct.
think a lot of Californians don't know that that's also a piece of it. They know about it, it's nationwide, but the international piece I don't think is as well comprehended as it. How's it going in Burbank? I mean, how?
Well, you know, it's been a big effort.
Right.
And this year, we did receive one-time Common Core money. And with that Common Core money, I believe that, and I know that John probably could tell us a little bit about his district, but that really it was supposed to be for a 2-year implementation plan, because we really want to do some good training, and districts right now are deficit spending. They don't really have money in professional development. No, the money for textbooks have been used as well. We really use most of that money for training this year, because it's not just training for teachers, it's also training for administrators. And then we also have to train our parents too, so they can see the differences and the kinds of assignments that will be coming home within the years to come.
So new textbooks?
New textbooks are in the works with Common Core standards. About 85% of our standards will be the same, and we change about 15%, maybe a little bit less. But at the same time too, it's different kind of teaching strategies that you'll be seeing in the classroom as well. It's all about career and college readiness. Businesses have weighed on this too, and they really want to make sure that when our students leave high school, that they're career and college ready.
And we're talking about math and science and English.
Correct.
Right.
And the biggest Common Core standards, as you know, are in language arts, English, and also mathematics.
Right. Mr. Gundry, in the first segment, we obviously talked about local control funding formula. How is that related to the implementation of Common Core? How is the funding mechanism interrelated with the sort of the practical implementation of a whole new education standard?
Well, it kind of makes it a 3-dimensional entity, because we're trying to implement a new way of approaching teaching and learning, but also a new way of funding things. And there's an accountability system, not just for student testing, but also for how we're spending the money.
Right.
And there are very specific guidelines on, they call it local control, but a lot of the local control has kind of been taken away through regulation. But we have a very heavy responsibility for spending the money on the students who generate the funds. And there's a lot of public input, parent input, community input. The stakeholders all have some say in how this money is being spent. I guess that's where the local control comes in. There's a lot of local accountability for how the money is spent.
So you had community meetings leading up to the budget, leading up to the implementation,
Yes.
the rollout next year.
Yes, we've had quite a few. Actually, we're still in that process. We're at the end of the process, but we're still in that process. It's difficult, though, because we have really raised the expectation through this input, the gathering of input, because people think there's more money than there is.
Right. And a lot of it is arguing over the same
Yes.
slice of money.
So
that
we've
needs to be
created
cut.
not just a list of the things that we're planning to fund using the LCFF money, but we now have a very long list of what we're calling unfunded priorities.
So if I'm a 3rd grader, sometimes my wife accuses me of being a 3rd grader, maybe a 7th grader, I don't know. So if I'm a 3rd grader, what is going to be different last year to next year in the classroom with Common Core?
Well, the rigor will be very different. In addition to that, it's really a lot about performance and really taking the knowledge that you have and be able to use it as far as performing, that I have this amount of knowledge and so now I'm performing at a higher level or a deeper level. You know, for example, I'll give you a good example that I think people can relate to. Like in kinder, you know, one of the things that we used to have as a standard for kinder is for students to be able to count 1 through 20. And a lot of that is memorization, which is not a high level of thinking. Now we want to really do critical thinking. So we may put on their desk a number of objects on their desk And now we will actually ask them to take objects and to count out 20 of them. That takes a higher level of thinking skills and also a deeper level of understanding.
And so how are we going to measure we talked about accountability and expectation. What's the mechanism for measuring the success of Common Core? Some states have already implemented it. I guess Kentucky was one of the first states to implement it, but the results are not in yet. What's the mechanism going forward to see if it's working?
Well, that's a great question because we're not exactly sure.
That's why I asked it.
You know, I always say that assessment drives our practice as educators because we want to be successful, and in order to do so, our students have to be successful on whatever tests are being given. This year, some Common Core tests were given across the state, but we're not going to see any results.
Right.
So those results are being used for further development of the assessment tools.
And Sacramento suspended assessment testing for 1 year or 2 years?
The CSTs?
Yeah, 1 year.
For this year. Yeah, we did not do the old CST test this year. So they've suspended the API and the accountability report cards while they're gathering data for the new Common Core assessments.
And what's the game plan to bring them back? Are they coming back next year or the year after?
They're coming.
We still don't know.
The testing is coming next year, but it'll be a baseline year, and so there'll be nothing to compare it to the first year.
But they're very different too. This is the first year that the first time in education we've ever had electronic tests. So they're all, where students will be taking it on computers.
Mm-hmm.
Another need for all the districts, to have upgraded computers and enough for the students to take it. We are testing grades 3 through 8, and in high school, instead of teaching assessing grades 9, 10, and 11, we're only going to assess grade 11 too.
Interesting.
No other grades.
Yeah, this is something that a lot of districts are struggling with because you're suddenly having to test every student online. Well, a lot of districts don't have that capability. They either don't have the computers or they may not even have the infrastructure to do the online testing. Now, the Common Core money that we got, one of the appropriate expenditures for it was technology. And we spent almost half of our Common Core money buying Chromebooks so the students would have devices to test on. We also had to upgrade our internet service to every school in the district. We had schools that did not have Wi-Fi.
Right.
And so we had to get Wi-Fi installed in every school in the district and increase the bandwidth even in the ones that had it. And so that was a huge expense to the district.
How many schools are we talking about?
We have 28 schools.
28 schools and how many?
19.
19 schools. So that's a lot of infrastructure. That's
Yes.
a practical implementation hurdle that needs to be overcome.
Right, and one of my big concerns about this is, at least in the first couple of years, when you're having kids test online for the first time and they have not had computers available to them, you're going to be testing more than the content material. You're going to be testing the student's facility with the technology, which isn't the intent of the assessment.
Some students are just naturally more intuitive when it comes to electronics than
Yes.
others.
And teachers
And
need
also-
that testing, that training as well.
Right, and also for our little ones, our grade 3 and up, some of them need keyboarding taught to them too. If they don't have the computers at home, then they're not as savvy as the other kids as far as the keyboard. So then that brings in another requirement of teaching keyboarding to those elementary students.
Now, has there been some pushback on the local level to Common Core? Are you seeing, or has people just said, it's the law of the land, let's make the best of it? I mean, how has the steps been going?
I've seen almost no pushback, a couple of individuals, but we have been preparing in some way for Common Core for the last 3 years. And so this isn't a new conversation that we're just changing everything from 1 year to the next. We started rewriting our curriculum 3 years ago when I arrived in Pasadena to reflect Common Core and our 21st Century Learning Initiative, which is the framework for Common Core.
How about
Same with us.
Same with you.
Same with us. And also, too, I think that's so easy for our community to embrace, that if you're getting them, ready for the workforce and you're getting them ready for college, we hear a lot about the statistics of students that are graduating from high school and they get fairly good grades, and then they go on to college and they have to take a remedial math or English
Right.
class. So that's something that we'll be working with too in tracking, because we want to really make sure that the work that we're doing K-12 is making a difference.
And that's the goal, is to have that student ready for their next academic step, so they don't need remediation. So there was in essence, there was a piece of the old system that was graduating students that were not prepared for higher education or for even a certificate program.
Right.
And so that was the recognition, is that we have to better prepare and then also compete globally with the students who are getting better prepared.
And the other, if I may,
Yeah, go on.
the other piece about the Common Core too is it really focuses on collaboration and communication. And one of the things that we have to realize is, as our society in general gets more dependent on technology, those are the two skills that sometimes gets lost amidst the process. We don't have students really making phone conversations like they used to. They're texting. Everything is electronically. So we don't want to lose those skills, because in the workforce, those are the main skills that make people successful, is communication and collaboration.
Right.
So that is part of the Common Core standards as well.
It's interesting, in one of the classes that I teach at USC, I talk about how it used to be we went to the coffee shop to have a conversation, and now we go to the coffee shop and we have our earplugs in and everybody's listening to their own song. Nobody's talking to anybody, and so that isolation is
There you have it.
it's there. And
Right. So we're having to do things deliberately that we used to do just because it's the way we lived.
right.
And the communication piece is huge. You know, kids don't write the way they used to because they're used to writing, text messages and Twitter feeds, and
Right.
and so communication comes in short bursts, and we don't have as much of an emphasis on the study of literature as we used to have.
Right.
And so we're having to go back, and even critical thinking. I've been contending for a long time that we learned a lot of critical thinking in the past through the study of social studies.
Right.
And we have de-emphasized social studies in the era of high-stakes accountability. And so we're having to go back in many ways to do things in a deliberate way that we used to do as a matter of course.
Interesting. Any last education thoughts you want to throw out there in our last minute?
Well, I would just like to add, too, another critical skill, too, that we want to make sure doesn't get lost as technology does, is everybody has their smartphones. And you look at children walking all around with a smartphone in their hand. You know, it used to be they had a book in their hand,
Right.
reading. And that's the foundation for all learning. So we
Right.
can't lose that as far as our education system.
Well, my children always get mad at me when they need to look up a word in a dictionary. Their first thought is to go online, and I always go get the old-fashioned Webster's dictionary, and I say, look it up, and I say, put a mark next to the word, and my both daughters fight me on that.
I
tooth
fight
and
on
nail.
that too.
That's why we have the book in the house. Anyway, thank you guys very much for being here. This is a complex subject with lots of factors, and it was good to hear your perspectives. Hopefully next year we'll come back and we'll talk about the implementation. In Sacramento, if you're listening, give more money to our public schools. Thank you for joining us on The Question Is with Anthony Portantino. We'll be back again next month.